Welcome to Corpus Conversations, a podcast series hosted by Jonas Golze. Throughout this series, we'll be chatting with senior industry leaders about current business challenges, market trends, and hopefully offering some useful insights, while sharing a few laughs along the way. We hope these conversations will give you a light bulb moment, a new strategy or idea, or just a different perspective that helps you lead your business forward in 2021 and beyond.
Welcome to Corpus Conversations. My name is Jonas Golze. I'm your host. Today, I'm talking to Geoff Bellingham. He's an executive with L'Oreal here in Australia. Geoff leads the consumer products team. The conversation was really insightful. Geoff is a phenomenal leader who has led through several difficult transformations and has inspired many of his team across Asia Pacific. Geoff, I would love to hear where you grew up and how that, reflecting from your career, how that influenced you. How do you think your childhood influenced some of the choices you have taken in your career?
So I'm a Kiwi. I think you can probably pick that up from the accent. Born in Wellington, but lived all my life growing up in Auckland, New Zealand. West Auckland, to be fair, which I think influenced in a way that it's a real multicultural melting pot out West Auckland. And the youngest of a family of five. Mother is a nurse, father is a trained accountant, but a small business owner. Growing up, it was something that was challenging with, particularly my father as a small business owner in 1987 with a bit of a crash that happened there being impacted. So that influenced us in certain ways, but in other ways, we had very strong family support system, grew up with very, I guess, a work ethic that you needed, what you put in, you got out of it. A lot of encouragement and support academically to, as you'd expect, try hard at school, it's go to school, go to university, we'll find a way to make that happen. And equally at the same time, a real outdoors, we're this part of the Kiwi culture, sport very important, outdoors very important there as well. And I think the one thing that I was very lucky is for probably a period of about 6 years, we grew up on a small farm. And that gave us the space as children to roam, to explore, to enjoy and respect nature in different ways. The odd incident with the ram chasing us around paddocks and some scary moments there. But I think that was a great part of my childhood there. But equally, I'd also say our family home was a bit of the social centre for friends, for family, whether it's barbecues or pop-ins and things like that. And I think that has another influence on probably how our family home is today, following in the footsteps of that.
That's fantastic. It's interesting. I had similar background, actually. My father had a small business too. And there were some times where his revenue would go up and down and there would be some risks he would take and sometimes it would pay off, sometimes it wouldn't. And it made me quite risk averse in the first part of my own career. How has that been for you? Have you felt like that?
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. I think there's moments, you talk about memories which sear in your memories. And generally those aren't the good times when, you're going on that extra holiday or you've got that. But the moments where you can't do things and you have to be very frugal and as I said, my mother's a nurse and she'd nursing for 40 years. And that was the constant source of income, but that was also full-time work with shift work and things like that. So you really appreciate the consistency of being able to, earn a living to balance that upwards and down. And so I certainly think when we talk a bit later probably about how I like to lead, I think carefully is a word that springs to mind, and probably less, I like to take risks. I like to test and learn, but certainly within a frame or within a set of boundaries that aren't going to, we don't have to sell the farm if things turn to custard.
Yeah, yeah. It's such a great point and important. How was it with five or four siblings, right? You were five, so four siblings.
Three siblings. Yeah. I was the youngest of three. Very, very lucky, I would say. I tell mum and dad they got it right third time, a couple of test runs first, which is generally disagreed by both brother and sister and my parents. However, what it did for me is I think I have an innate competitive streak. And when you have an older brother and an older sister, you're always chasing to catch up. And whether that be in school exams in the early days, seeing, some of their achievements, it probably inspired me to put some work in, but equally, they're a source of support and help at other times. So, very lucky that I think we have a relatively close bond that we can talk and support in different ways.
That's fantastic. Geoff, you spent a lot of time abroad in your career. Would love to learn from you when your first experience was and what kind of triggered in you to stay abroad, to get the experience, to experience different markets and.
Yeah, look, I think there's a couple of things to note. First is, for the first 15 years of my life, I was on one airplane the entire time, which is funny to think these days with that. So didn't travel a lot, and didn't feel the need. That we had, I think, one family trip from New Zealand to Australia a while back. And it was sport that pulled me overseas first. And I used to play a fairly high level of badminton. And in order to then play, some of the best in the world, you needed to go into Asia or into Europe, Denmark in particular. So between school and university, I took a year off. Not, the fact that I was spending more time training and less time studying sort of indicated I needed a break from academia and to really follow a passion on sport. So I lived in mostly Denmark for a year between school and university. And that sort of opened my eyes to what travel was like, opened my eyes that I had to earn a bit of money while I was over there as well. And I tell you what, doing a paperboy run 6 days a week between 2 a.m. and 5 a.m. in a Danish winter, you understand why you might want to get a job beyond a middle of a winter paperboy. So I think that inspired me to come back and study hard as well. So I had a lot of great experience traveling abroad with sport, probably for a better part of 10 years while I was actively playing international badminton. But from a work point of view and a career point of view, New Zealand was a fantastic place because relatively small. So you touched a lot of things within the business you worked in. You didn't necessarily have the resources to have big departments everywhere, but you were constrained by the market size, the amount of investment you could do. So an opportunity came up in 2007. I was working with Unilever at the time in New Zealand, and an opportunity came up in Australia. And bigger budgets, great, world-class customers, and with, for example, Woolworths is one of the better operators around the world. So to really go from what I would say was a bigger fish in a small pond to a smaller fish in a very big pond with a lot of opportunity. And that, with a bit of this competitive streak, I guess, to say, let's really test ourselves to see if, you've got the capability to succeed in a bigger market. And so that was the first kind of foray abroad, which was absolutely fantastic. And I think the learning experience for the 3 years where I was in Sydney was some of the best learning of my entire career.
That's fantastic. It's interesting. What I really enjoy being European, working in Australia and Asia Pacific, is that you get very different cultural streams coming together.
Yeah.
In Europe, obviously, if you're French or German, Italian is perhaps a little bit different, but there's a similarity to it, right? Being Dutch, etc. But here, with the Asian culture and the Anglo culture and other cultures coming together more and more, I think there's so much learning, especially when you work in organizations. How did you experience that being in Southeast Asia, and like how to get the job done and really inspire your teams?
I think that's a great call, because from Sydney, we spent 2 years in Kuala Lumpur, 3 years back in New Zealand, and then another little over 5 years in Thailand, in Bangkok. And leading cross-culturally is very interesting and very different. There are some universal principles which apply, people first, the principles of how you lead. At the end of the day, we're all human beings with similar needs in some respects, but go about it in very different ways. So I found you needed to ensure that you understand and respect the local customs, the local cultures, the ways of doing things, not trying to put your own cultural biases on moments, and it is very interesting. If you're in a larger team meeting in Thailand, and I will want to pose a question to the broader team, I could tell you every single time in which order people were going to raise their hand and provide their comment, because it would go down in a hierarchical chain according to who should speak first, who should speak second and third. Now, in our sort of culture here in Australia, you'd say, well, whoever's got an idea and something useful to say, get your hand up, and we'd probably be comfortable doing it. So do you try and change that because you want to hear from different people apart from your immediate leadership team, which you speak to on a daily basis? But you'd be fighting against a deep-seated sort of cultural norm. So you're best actually to either conduct these workshops in a different way so it removes that, or accept that it's going to happen and that you will wait to get some of the feedback you may actually want from your staff outside your leadership team. So I think the biggest thing it came back to was understanding your teams and people and connecting in a way that is relevant and safe for all involved.
You mentioned people first, right? And I think that is something that I can hear very clearly out of our conversation. It's something that really matters to you.
Yeah.
How have you evolved your leadership approach, right? Perhaps to just step back for a second, I've been thinking about leadership for a very long time, the different approaches, the frameworks that exist. And I think I got to the conclusion that it's so unique and important to evolve over time that it's very hard to just pick up a certain framework and say, that's how I'm going to lead.
Yeah.
If you would step back and saying, here's what you developed in and what kind of framework you use for yourself, how would you describe your leadership style?
Look, I think at the heart of it is, leadership is not something to do, it's something to be. So how am I practicing this, not necessarily saying this is what, the 5 good things a leader should do. I think I try and approach it in a few different ways. There's probably the style that works for me that clearly may not work for others, but I think I like to look at it in a few different ways. The first thing is I think there's intrinsic motivators, and which are very important around passion, the will. You hear the things around it's easy to light a fire under people's feet, but not so easy to light a fire inside their heart. So you really need to work out the extrinsic things, the things, whether it's job title, status, money, how that motivates, and then the internal side of this development and this growth and this pride of what they're doing and making a difference, towards a goal or a purpose that we've agreed on. And so I think you can't have one and not the other, but it's around the balances that we're doing here. And I always found you need to tick the right boxes on the extrinsic motivators, but how are we really enhancing these intrinsic ones, the pride, the team, the leadership, to know that I'm growing and developing in what I'm doing every day. Because look, we do spend a lot more time at work than we do at home with our families. So you've got to make that worthwhile and rewarding, because like it or not, it is linked with some of our self-worth and how good we feel about ourselves. But so there is the people-centric aspect, leading with empathy and emotional intelligence. I think that's important. My personal style is probably a little more calm, a little more considered, not necessarily, jumping up and yelling and screaming and waving arms around. There's elements of, I think, resilience, I would hope. My wife would probably say it's stubbornness and a bit of competitiveness in there. But I embrace a concept, I think, of trying to take people on a journey, almost this leader as a teacher role as well. Sometimes that means I tend to talk too much, probably about now, to some of your questions. And, some of the things I'm working on are being more precise and concise with when I'm making a point, not to need to make it 3 times over and make it once, make it properly and move on. So, and I think that's the last point I'd say is, yes, there's leader as a teacher, but there's also leader as a learner, because I feel all of us, if we're, I learn things every day. I think it's the screw ups that I've done in my career so far that have defined and helped me grow as much as the positive wins we've had or the contributions I've made.
It's great. I really appreciate that. And I can see how, the stories we discussed earlier about your childhood, how you grew up, your international experience, how it all comes together, and how it's not some outside-in framework or methodology you're applying, but it's really who you are, right? And you bring yourself to your roles, and by doing that, have a very strong impact on your teams. One thing that stood out for me from one of the things you just said is, in my work with people, I see very often the balance between extrinsic and intrinsic motivations and how important that is. Using Maslow's hierarchy of needs or other frameworks to understand where do you actually come in and how do you make sure people move towards that self-actualization. But one thing I realized is that a lot of people actually don't really know what their intrinsic motivations are. And I wonder if you had a similar experience, because very often, if they don't know, it can be also confusing to help them try and, balance it out.
A leadership coach we were working with not that long ago said an interesting statement, which is you can't put in what God took out. So you need to be careful, I guess, if you're trying to appeal to certain aspects of teams and of people which have no meaning or relevance, or it's not important to me. So I think what you're saying is we are all created differently with different value structures, different things going on in our life, and we may have similar values. But if I've got a challenging time with my family or medically, or I'm dealing with loss, or I'm on a honeymoon period, so I think people will change over time. People will vary depending what's going on externally with them. And so a key thing is don't assume that the same intrinsic values that drive people one month are identical the next, and that communicating and asking questions and spending time looking at all the forms of the communication, non-verbal, verbal, are really important. And this is probably a watch out within our new world of Zoom calls and Teams meetings and things like that you do take the chance to connect with your teams in a more human, a more face-to-face way, balanced with the virtual engagement, because you may miss signals and signs about that what you thought was working and what you thought was driving them, is actually not. So, or you need to dial up one aspect of driving a bit more passion or motivation or development or just, a fist pump or a high five or a shoulder to cry on. So it's a really interesting thing that's happening at the moment.
Geoff, I want to talk with you a bit about transformation, because I think your approach to transformation is very much driven with your own teams, really internally figuring out how do we do this as a group of people, getting external help when it's needed, but always coming back to the team needs to get there ultimately. And I think that has been a fantastic observation from my side. I would love to perhaps start off by thinking through how would you define transformation? We have certainly come across so many definitions, right? And there's, again, not one size fits all, but how do you think about transformation? How would you define it?
If I think about transformation, the first things that come to mind for me are around lasting change. I think about meaningful change as well. So it's change which lasts, and it's change which really is significant to an organization or a person, and it has a real purpose as well. So I think lasting, meaningful purpose. And the other thing when I think about transformation, I guess, is I think revolution more than evolution. And what I mean by that is it's transformations come with a certain cadence or a speed, and evolution can be done over a very long period of time. When I talk transformation, and what I mean about transformation is it's lasting change at a pace or at speed where you can see from start to finish, or, is within a defined set of time, which is not 20 years or anything like that.
And, that timing, in my experience, one of the biggest challenges with that is that different stakeholders will have different expectations on timing.
Yeah.
Right. You might have the board and the management team having a certain expectation, the team, the market, competitors. Perhaps tell us about an example where you led a team through a transformation, and how did you get that timing right?
I think there's a few different. Firstly, the other thing is, I think from a transformation point of view, we don't have to think that an entire business is going to change dramatically. Transformations can be on certain parts of the business as well that are leading towards the whole. So I think one of the transformations that has stood out to me, and it's back into a Southeast Asian example, is probably turning what I would call a marketing-led business to a more commercially orientated business. And what that transformation required is to say, guys, perhaps 20, 30 years ago, producing a lovely TVC, great ad with the right people in it, talking about a product, blasting it across the airwaves, and then sticking your products on a shelf is going to make this fly. And it's the recipe that had worked, and it's done really well. But today, we have partners, we have business, we have stakeholders. We need to build our brands through partnerships. Now, that could be through different agencies, traditional digital agencies, certainly through our customers as well, and having different customers in the consumer goods around the channels that you operate, e-commerce, pharmacy, grocery, convenience stores. And so what we did is we really looked at how we could grow through these partners, and it changed, I think, the starting point. Rather than we will have this lovely product at this size and we'll put it on TV, to say, well, this size product doesn't really fit that well on e-commerce. It's not good for a convenience store where someone wants to spend $1.50. So you bring this customer or commercial sensitivity and centricity into your thinking at a very early stage. And we did that. And then all of a sudden, instead of launching a particular product range in one format, we launched it across 4 different formats for different customers and channels. And all of a sudden, you were reaching millions more people with the same effective concept. And so it was a really interesting transformation of doing what we've always done and thought was right to asking our customers and our consumers what they needed and actually providing it, and provided sort of significant growth for us.
Did you feel like you had to balance, cost and so that mindset shift with a cost lens as well at the time, or was it more focused on really just getting the commercial sales focus in?
No, I think any transformation needs to have, multiple layers of what you're trying to achieve. Certainly growth is often one of the biggest part, but it's also what is your right organizational cost structure for the future? What is the right areas that you're going to be investing in? There's this ongoing debate between traditional media and precision digital media of where are we going to put our money? What's getting the best bang for the buck? Mass awareness versus really targeted conversions. So there's tensions right through the organization and the P&L on different costs. But it's true that you need to anticipate where that's coming for. And we often do, okay, what's going to happen in the next 3 years? Where are we going to shift our resources? Where are we going to invest? What costs do we need to trim across the organization to be agile and to be able to invest for growth? So it's certainly one of the biggest challenges, and in particular when it comes to people, and to reshape your organizational structure to, either lead the market or follow the market in certain circumstances, which is the most tricky, whether you're going to put this on TV or this on social media. That's a fairly easier one to say, we've got 10 people too many over here, and I need to pivot from, let's say, traditional customer channels to e-commerce, because sometimes those skills are not transferable. So you've got some really tough people decisions to make.
Staying with the digital aspect for a second, right?
Yeah.
How do you see an augmented future where some of those really important people skills that we talked about today, the strategic mindset that you just laid out so nicely about how you thought about it, but also this ongoing automation, augmentation of processes, especially in a field like consumer products, going to be so important over the coming years. How do you bring those together from your perspective and how you lead?
Okay, I think I might start a bit broader on that one. And, we're all going through or have gone through, hopefully, and coming out the other side of a global pandemic. And the trends or the things that have really come out through this period, in my mind, they were all trends before. The pandemic has just been this almighty accelerator. And if I look at L'Oreal in particular, the sustainability as a really important driver has come even bigger. Science and health-driven safety and products are very important. As we said, digital and e-commerce evolution is, one of the bigger drivers here. I think Netflix are having some great growth on their subscribers, and Amazon's gone through the roof. Alibaba having the biggest singles day ever, the last 11/11. But equally on the other side, there's purpose-driven companies, other companies that are going to attract the talent and, succeed moving forward, ethical companies as well. And then things like trust and transparency coming to the fore. So I think in today's world, the digital acceleration, the e-commerce acceleration is one of those. And it's critical, but equally, it's not, in my mind, coming at the expense of the physical world and the physical touch points and the traditional touch points we have. It's the online plus offline synergies that are coming together that are so interesting. And at L'Oreal, we're seeing fantastic opportunity to give consumers an even better O+O experience. And I'll use makeup as an example here. You have a think about traditionally, you might have gone into one of the best stores you have, and you have someone there to interact with you on, this shade, this color, this there, and it's great. And you're relying on the expertise of that beauty advisor, who may or may not be having a good day or a bad day, who may be brand new. You may know more about makeup than them. But when you arm that beauty advisor with online learning, with diagnostic tools, with virtual try-ons, so people are a bit unsure on a particular shade, they can look at their smartphone and be enabled to say, try this, try that. You're really enhancing that physical interaction with a consumer. And then you look at the example of a rural store, of how O+O can support and enhance an experience there that they've never had before. The use of things like QR codes, so they can scan and then have a virtual conversation with someone in the office back here at L'Oreal, or they can use a virtual try-on, because testers were never available in that store because it was a small store. All of a sudden, digital has enabled me to try different things on, to get recommendations, to add +1 purchases and really build a beauty regime. So I think there's so much options with that digital has brought us, and so much potential in the future to enhance what we're doing, but also to bring new things to people, which is really interesting.
Really, really interesting. Thank you, Geoff. It's really great to talk to you. I would love to ask you your final words on 2021 and this year. What do you think?
Look, I think as people, as businesses, as consumers, as parents, we're a lot more prepared. We've gone through, I think, a fairly dramatic and far-reaching experience that many of us wouldn't like to repeat again, I think, and that has put some challenging times there. So I think we've built a resilience as a global community to be able to be more agile in face of change. Great example being the snap lockdown we had in Victoria. The pivot from in-school learning to the homeschool learning from that Monday to Wednesday just got turned on. Generally speaking, I think people handled it pretty well. And so the experiences of 2020 are really going to serve us well in 2021. And I do think a lot of companies have been forced to find efficiencies in ways of working, in communication, in cost control, and in jumping on opportunities quick where they are, where there's a consumer need. So I think what we're seeing is people are bringing those learnings into 2021, hopefully with a little more of a stable environment. The vaccine and things like that offer hope of a return to some things that have been out of bounds, international travel being one of those. But it's certainly going to, I think, be a year, and I'll refer to L'Oreal as a year that we've learned a lot. And by applying those in 2021, we think there's going to be a certain slower start to the year, but a positivity and a momentum that's really going to build into the back half. So I think we're coming to it very excited, anticipating, but wary that it will be 2 steps forward, 1 step back, and equally knowing that communicating with our teams, our customers, our stakeholders in the business has to stay high, because that's how we're going to get through the bumps and the troughs that are inevitably going to come.
Thank you so much, Geoff. It's been fantastic to talk to you and learn from your experience today.
Thanks for joining our Corpus conversation today. We would love to connect with you. Sign up to our podcast, follow us on LinkedIn, or email us at connect@corpus.team.